Sandy says read, and welcome to the channel. You guys, today we are going to do a review and discussion of The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. This one's a little bit older, but it fits the Dragon Reading Challenge. So I grabbed this off the shelf and read The Eyes of the Dragon here recently. I'm going to bring you this review. Before we get started, I want to remind you guys that you can play bingo. I do have a Sandy Says Read bingo card generator over at Bingo Baker. And I'll put a link for that in the drop-down box below. You can generate your own Sandy Says Read bingo card so that as I go through this review of The Eyes of the Dragon, you can check off the boxes of all the things that I say frequently. Yes. There's no prizes for this. You just get the dopamine hit each time that I say one of these things, and you hear it and you get to click something off of there. Isn't that exciting? Yes, I bring you guys all the great and wonderful stuff. Also, I want to welcome you to subscribe to the channel. Please welcome your friends to subscribe to the channel too, because you guys, this is a book channel. We do all the bookish stuff here at Sandy Says Read. We do booktube tags. We do book reviews like we're doing today. We do live stream interviews with publishers and authors and editors. So yeah, this is a bookish channel. And I should mention that I am my own sponsor. So I have a merch shop and I have a free newsletter where you can get information about what's going on in my author life and personal life and a column from a dragon. The newsletter information should be zigging across the screen in front of you now. But I will also put that in the drop-down box below, where all the good stuff goes. Now let's dive into the review for The Eyes of the Dragon with the specs. We'll start with the specs. This is by Stephen King. It was published by Viking Penguin in 1987. The illustrations inside this version, and I'll show you a couple of them, they're by David Palladini, and his copyright on that is also 1987. This particular version is 326 pages. It's a fantasy, obviously, but it's listed as fantasy. I would call it young adult fantasy. And let me read the cover flap for you, because the back cover just has a nice little picture going on there. But let me read the cover flap for you. A tale of archetypal heroes and sweeping adventures of dragons and princes and evil wizards, as only Stephen King can tell it. The passage through the castle is dim, sensed by few and walked by only one. Flagg knows the way well. In 400 years, he has walked it many times, in many guises, but now the passage serves its true purpose. Through the spy hole it conceals, the court magician observes King Roland, old, weak, yet still a king. Roland's time is nearly over, though, and young Prince Peter, tall and handsome, the measure of a king in all ways, stands to inherit the realm. Yet a tiny mouse is enough to bring him down, a mouse that chances upon a grain of dragon sand behind Peter's shelves and dies crying tears of fire and belching gray smoke. A mouse that dies as King Roland does. Flagg saw it all and smiled, for now Prince Thomas, a young boy easily swayed to Flagg's own purposes, would rule the kingdom. But Thomas has a secret that has turned his days into nightmares and his nights into prayed-for oblivion. The last bastion of hope lies at the top of the Needle, the royal prison where Peter plans a daring escape. Writing with the wit and power that have enthralled millions, Stephen King has taken the classic fairy tale form and transformed it. Okay. I have for you the Sandy synopsis. The Sandy synopsis says, an evil magician named Flagg sows despair in the kingdom of Delane by poisoning the king and framing the beloved prince for it. Because you guys, the magician is not the one who looks through the spy hole and sees King Roland being poisoned. The magician isn't the one who sees that. And the mouse dying is one little piece of the puzzle. I'm going to take the cover off of this. We're going to make the book naked so that it's easier to handle while we talk about this. But the mouse plays a role in this, but not as significant as that cover flat made it seem. I was expecting the mouse's role to be larger in this book. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So let us dive in, and let me tell you that Stephen King uses Chekhov's law brilliantly, as he should, right? He uses it brilliantly with the use of napkins in this story. So let me say, let's see, on pages 11 and 14, we have this napkin concept introduced. And I'm going to read for you what's happening here with Queen Sasha and her son, Peter, when he is like 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, something like that. I think 5 or 6. He's young, okay? And she is talking to him about how he behaved at a banquet earlier that evening. So Sasha instructed Peter carefully, and she observed him carefully on the night of the banquet. And later, as he lay sleepy in his bed, she talked to him. Because she was a good mother, she first complimented him lovingly on his behavior and manners. And this was right, because for the most part, they had been exemplary. But she knew that no one would correct him where he went wrong unless she did it herself. And she knew she must do it now, in these few years when he idolized her. So when she was finished complimenting him, she said, "You did one thing wrong, Pete, and I never want to see you do it again." Peter lay in his bed, his dark blue eyes looking at her solemnly. "What was that, Mother?" "You didn't use your napkin." And she explains to him, "You left it folded on your plate. You used you brushed your fingers on your shirt instead of using your napkin." And he says, "But Father and Mr. Flagg and the other nobles." And she says, "Bother Flagg and bother all the nobles in Delane," she cried with such force that Peter cringed back in his bed a little. He was afraid and ashamed for having made those roses bloom in her cheeks. "What your father does is right, for he is the king. And what you do when you are king will always be right. But Flagg is not king, no matter how much he would like to be. And the nobles are not kings, and you are not king yet, but only a little boy who forgot his manners." She saw he was afraid and smiled. She laid her hand on his brow. "Be calm, Peter," she said. "It is a small thing, but still important." And then they have more conversation. They talk about some other things, and he thinks, well, maybe this napkin thing is blown over, right? And then she says, "Do you understand these things, Peter?" Peter nodded. "Fine. Now tell me." She leaned toward him. "Does a dog use a napkin?" Humbled and ashamed, Peter looked down at the counterpane and shook his head. Apparently, the conversation hadn't wandered as far as he had thought. Perhaps because the evening had been very full, and because he was now very tired. Tears rose in his eyes and spilled down his cheeks. He struggled against the sobs that wanted to come. He locked them in his chest. Sasha saw this and admired it. "Don't cry over an unused napkin, my love," said Sasha, "for that was not my intention." She rose, her full and pregnant belly before her. The delivery of Thomas was now very near. "Your behavior was otherwise exemplary. Any mother in the kingdom would have been proud of a young son who behaved himself half so well, and my heart is full with admiration for you. I only tell you these things because I am the mother of a prince. That is sometimes hard, but it cannot be changed. And in truth, I would not change it if I could." Blah, 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 blah. She goes on and she tells him, we promised to do what God would have you do. "I promise. Then all is well." She kissed him lightly. "Luckily, I am young and you are young. We will talk of these things more when you have more understanding." They never did. But Peter never forgot the lesson. He always used his napkin, even when those around him did not. Okay, so we have this setup here for why this young lad wants to use a napkin at every meal, and why even when he is older, those napkins are so important. You guys, those napkins are so freaking important through this whole novel. That setup is right there, and it's so brilliantly done. Brilliant. Nicely done. Also, right after this interaction, she's pregnant with Thomas, and that does not go well, and she is murdered during that delivery. And Flagg, the evil magician, it's his fault. He's the one who has her murdered because he's evil. We'll talk about him quite a bit, but she's murdered after that. And Peter has, he inherits or takes over her dollhouse. She had a dollhouse that she played with when she lived at her parents' home over yonder. And when she came to the castle and became the queen, King Roland was like, oh, she misses her dollhouse. I'm going to have a new one made for her. And so he did. He had some artisan create a new dollhouse for her with all these little working parts and little working features inside, with a little loom that could really make little mats and rugs and just little things inside that really worked. A little stove that could really heat up. And she didn't really play with it because she's a queen, but her son, Peter, did play with it. And there's discussion in the book about, he's a lad now. He probably shouldn't be playing with a dollhouse. But the king went and watched him playing with the dollhouse and saw that he was having his toy soldiers protect the house like it was their castle. And he was having like raiding parties try to invade the dollhouse, but the king's guard was protecting it and protecting it from these invaders and protecting it from dragons. And so Peter was using his imagination playing with this dollhouse and playing what the king thought were, good, manly, heroic games. So the king had no problem with Peter playing with this dollhouse and left him alone, which was nice and which was good, because later in the book, when Peter has an attraction to and a need for that dollhouse, no one really has a problem with it. Okay. All right. There were some other things that I noticed throughout this book that Stephen King is able to get away with because it was acceptable in the 80s, but we're not able to get away with now. As writers today, we can't do the big info dumps that Stephen King could do in this book. As writers today, we can't have the authorial intrusion that Stephen King could get away with in this book. The switching points of view that Stephen King could get away with in this book. Let's see, I wrote down, so let's talk about a couple of them, okay? They're cleverly woven in, they're used seamlessly, and they work. All right, so I don't want anyone to hear this as, oh, Sandy's picking at Stephen King's work. No. I'm saying Stephen King was able to get away with this because it was acceptable in the 80s, because he could make it work. All right, that's what I'm saying. He made it work. He made it flow. That's what I'm saying. Let's talk about a couple of those things now. On page 22, we have, and we also have one of these diagrams, one of these illustrations, where I was mentioning that we wanted to look at the illustrations. Look at that. Isn't that like horror, right? Of course, it's like horror because it's Stephen King. But we have, this is an illustration of the wizard Flagg's hand, and he is crushing a poisonous spider. He's crushing it so that its blood flows into this goblet. Yeah, okay. And let's talk about that for a second. On page 22, I wrote at here, info dumping and telling was acceptable in the 80s. The thing is, we had this huge info dump about this spider and how Flagg used to feed this spider little poisoned baby mice. Let's see, Flagg did this to increase the potency of the spider's own poison, which was already potent beyond belief. The spider was blood red and as big as a rat. Her bloated body quivered with venom. Venom dripped from her stinger in clear drops that burned smoking holes in the top of Flagg's work table. Gross, right? Ugh, I don't like spiders anyway. But anyway, we go through this and it talks about how he, crushes this thing, gushed into the goblet. He poured brandy over the deadly stuff, stirred the two together, and he's going to give this brandy to Sasha, the queen. And then he decides, no. Let me get down here. Let's see. Sasha never knew how close she came to death that night. Arthurial intrusion. Moments after brewing the deadly drink, before the servant knocked, Flagg poured it down the drain in the center of his floor and stood listening to it hiss and bubble away into the pipe. His face was twisted with hate. When the hissing had died away, he flung the crystal goblet into the far corner with all his force. It shattered like a bomb. The servant knocked and was admitted. Flagg pointed to where the shards glittered. I've broken a goblet, he said. Clean it up. Use a broom, idiot. If you touch the pieces, you'll regret it. Basically, and it says, he poured the poison down the drain at the last moment because he realized he might well be caught. And King Roland loves Sasha so much that if she dies of poisoning, if he is suspicious of it, he will look into how she died. He will look into this and he will figure out, oh, Flagg, was this you? Run a sword through him or whatever, right? Hunting, after all, was the thing Roland did best. So Roland would probably figure that out. And then Flagg would be, if not killed, at least out on his butt. Let's see. I mentioned that we had switching point of view. Page 112. The thing is, I'm not complaining about this. I'm just saying Stephen King is able to do this without it being disruptive. Okay, he's able to do this. Guys, I'm telling you, if you know what the rule is and you know why you're breaking it, you can break it. Okay, and he breaks it here just fine. But I'm telling you, it was acceptable in the 80s. On page 112, we have Peter, who is being questioned about possibly murdering his father, the king, and the magistrate is questioning him. Let's see. I had nothing to do with this, Anders, Peter said. He had recovered himself, but his face was still pale and wretched, his eyes a deeper blue than the old Judge General had ever seen them. The box is yours, then? Yes. Why did you deny that you had such a box? I forgot. I haven't seen this box in probably 11 years or more. My mother gave it to me. What happened to it? Okay, and then we have text in italics. He's not calling me my lord or your highness anymore, Peter thought with a chill. He's not calling me by any term of respect at all. Can all of this really be happening, I wonder? Father poisoned? Thomas terribly ill? Pena standing here and doing everything but accusing me of murder. And my box, where in the name of the gods did it come from? And who put it in the secret compartment behind the books? I lost it, Peter said slowly. Anders, you don't really believe I murdered my father, do you? So we've been in Peter's point of view all the way down these paragraphs, all the way down here. And now we have italics again. I did not, ... But now I wonder, Anders Pena thought. So we just switched to someone else's point of view. We just jumped into somebody else's head in the middle of this scene. But it's okay. It did not jar me. It did not take me out of the, well, it did take me out of the story because I thought of it. Obviously, I noticed it and I wrote in the margin, head hopping galore. But it works. It's not the end of the world, okay? I loved him dearly, Peter said. And in italics again, I always thought so, ... But now I wonder about that too, Anders Pena thought. Okay, so we begin the scene in Peter's point of view. We end in Anders Pena point of view, but that's okay. I don't think it was destroying the scene to switch points of view. I don't think Stephen King did something, catastrophic there by switching. I think it's okay that he broke that rule because we needed to see in Peter's head. We needed to feel Peter being confused, being concerned, being upset, and we needed to see Anders Pena wondering about Peter's guilt or innocence. We needed to see them both. We needed to see it. Now, there are a couple of devices that Stephen King uses in this novel that appear in other Stephen King works. And I'm not complaining about that. I do that myself in some of my stuff. All authors, I should say all, some authors out here do that. We reuse devices that are cool and great. For example, the mouse, this little mouse that's in this story. The little mouse is also in the Green Mile. Now, the little mouse in the Green Mile doesn't die a burning, belching death like the little mouse in this story does. But the little mouse in this story is, I saw him in the Green Mile. I saw the connection. Maybe it was a stretch, but I saw the connection and I liked it though, because this little mouse is he's just moving the plot along. All right. Then also on page 241, hold please, let me get there. Page 241. I wrote in the margin a reverse Shawshank because we have one of the characters, his name is Dennis. He has to get into the castle without anyone noticing him. So what we have here is, at last he heard it and looked up. There, at eye height, was a round black hole in the solid castle wall. Fluid ran from it in listless streams. It was a sewer outflow pipe. Now for it, Dennis muttered. He drew back 5 paces, ran, and leaped. As he did, he felt the ice, rotted by the constant outflow of warm waste from the pipe, give under his feet. Then he was clinging to the mossy lip of the pipe. It was slick, and he had to clutch hard to keep from falling. He pulled himself up, digging for purchase with his feet, and finally yanked himself inside. Gross, right? He's getting into the castle using the sewer pipe instead of like Shawshank Redemption, where Andy had to use the pipe to get out. Right? So, but I thought that was clever. I liked the reverse device use in here. Although I think that this came out before he wrote Shawshank Redemption. I think. I should have looked that up to be sure. You guys can tell me in the comments below which came first, 1987 or Shawshank. What's next? Let's see. Okay, I did see a couple of inconsistencies. That surprised me. That surprised me because I didn't expect, I mean, in a book that's, how many pages did we say this was? 280 something? 300? No. There's my math going wrong. We have 326 pages. I did not expect in a 326 page book from Stephen King there to be any inconsistencies. Now, one of these might not be an inconsistency. You guys will have to tell me if I'm just losing my mind or what. But Dennis is a butler, and I think his age is funky. Tell me if I'm losing my mind. Let's go to page 228. Hold, please. Page 228. Dennis is about 20 years old. If I remember right, he was about 20 years old when Peter was accused of killing King Roland. He was about 20 years old when Peter was accused. He found the little mouse dying and took it to his father, who was also a butler, and said, "Oh my gosh, Dad, look at this mouse. I think it's dying. And this is weird where I found it, and it's weird how this happened, and what do we do?" And then they figured out, oh my gosh, this thing must have died from the same thing that the king died of, and where you found it is bad, and blah, 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 blah. But we think Dennis was 20. I think he was 20 when that happened. So on page 228, it is 5 years later. So Dennis should be 25, right? And Anders Pena, the Judge General, Pena nodded. He did not want to add to the boys' fear. But in this situation, nothing less than the truth could serve them. He's talking to Dennis. Every time someone refers to Dennis throughout this book, they're calling him a boy. They're referring to him as a boy instead of the young man or the butler. I mean, they keep calling him a boy. And that is weird to me. I mean, is a 25-year-old a boy? Or have I screwed this up completely and he's not really 25? Is he much younger than that? And I just completely... Tell me in the comments below if I'm just losing my mind. Thank you. Next, the other inconsistency I saw was the logo on the napkins. Okay, you guys, we're going to talk about the napkins. The napkins, it was brilliant. The use of the napkins, chef's kiss, right? Because of course, Stephen King knows what he's doing, and he's using that Chekhov's law, and he's got these napkins throughout this novel. And Peter, when he is accused of having murdered his father, he ends up going to the Needle. He is imprisoned at the top of this prison, at the top of the Needle, and he's there for many years. But when he goes there, he asks for napkins and his mother's dollhouse, the Queen's dollhouse. The Queen's already dead. So he wants napkins at every meal, and he wants the dollhouse. Well, people are thinking, what does he want napkins for? Well, he has always had napkins at his meals. He's always wanted napkins. So it's just a thing that the prince wants. And he can get away with it because it's something he's always wanted. Now, Anders Pena does think it's weird. And he's like, well, that's kind of odd that he wants napkins, but okay. Well, here's the thing. We're going to let him have these napkins, but every single one of the napkins has to have the kingdom's logo removed from it. Like the embroidery has to be unstitched. So Anders Pena pays an elderly lady to sit there and unstitch the logo from each napkin. And the napkins go on a little tray, and then they go off to the needle so that they can be delivered up to him with each meal. So 3 napkins a day, 21 napkins a week, right? So this lady has to unstitch 21 napkins a week. No problem. And it's nicely stated that Anders Pena has done this nice thing for this lady because he's paying her to unstitch the logo, to take the logo off of these napkins. They don't want the royal logo on these napkins that's going to a prisoner. You know, he's accused of killing the king. All right. They don't want the royal logo going to him. All right. It's beyond the pale that such a thing could be imagined. Right. So they want the logo off. No problem. Okay. And they're paying, Anders Pena is paying the lady to do that, which is a very nice gesture on Pena's part. He's being very kind to pay this woman. Well, then we get up to page 228. No, what page? 245. Hold, please. Let me go to page 245. And Dennis has gotten into the castle. He's snuck in there. He is snuck into the room where all the napkins kept. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these napkins. Why? Because many years ago, there was a queen who wanted to give a job to people. She wanted all of her people to have lots of jobs. And those jobs were making napkins and embroidering the logos onto the napkins. Long time ago. It was not a job that needed to be done, but the people needed work. And the queen knew she could pay them from the kingdom's coffers. So she had all these people, older people who could sew and make napkins. You guys, the napkins idea is just all throughout this book. It's brilliant. I'm telling you. So the queen from a long time ago had all these people making all these napkins. There were so many of them, no one would be able to use them all. So they were stored in a storeroom. Thousands upon hundreds of thousands of these napkins. So no one is missing them when they go off to Peter. No one's missing them. Okay. So here they all are. Dennis goes into this room and he has told Pena about this storeroom where all the napkins reside. And Pena is like, okay, you're going to write up a little message. You're going to pin it to one of these napkins and have it delivered to Peter with nobody knowing about it. Can you do that? Dennis is like, yeah, I can do that. So Dennis goes to the storeroom. He's got his little message that he has written. He attaches it to the underneath side of one of these napkins, folds it inside there. He's got it on the tray. He's got it the third one down. So Sunday or Saturday, whichever important night that it is, right? It's not going to be that breakfast. It's not going to be lunch. It's going to be dinner. So it's the third one down. It's on the tray. So the people are going to come. They're going to take the tray and off it goes. Where's the lady removing the logos? That wasn't there. It's on page 245. And I wrote out here, but the seamstress has to remove the logo. And there's a question mark. The seamstress removing the logos is missing in this equation. We've got all these napkins, and Dennis is just putting them on a tray, and he's sliding his note into one, but there's no seamstress. That is a problem. And that is weird. That it is weird to me that Stephen King let that slip by. It is weird to me that an editor let that slip by. It is weird to me that that slipped by. It is weird to me. That should. He lifted the Sunday breakfast napkin, Sunday lunch. For a moment, he almost passed over Sunday supper as well. And if he had done that, my tale would have had a very different ending. Better or worse, I cannot say, but surely different. In the end, however, Dennis decided 3 napkins deep was safe enough. He had found a pin in a crack between 2 boards in the farmhouse living room and had nipped it into one shoulder strap of the rough linsey camisole he wore as underwear. And if he had been thinking a little better, he would have nipped the note to his underwear with it in the bargain and spared himself that bad moment. But as I may have told you, Dennis's brains were sometimes a little lacking. Now he retrieved the pin and carefully attached the note to an inner fold of the napkin. Let it find you, Peter, he murmured in the ghostly silence of that storeroom, piled high with napkins made in another age. Let it find you, my king. Well, it shouldn't find him. It should find the seamstress, but she's not there. And on we go with our plot because, you know, she would mess things up. So we're moving on. Next, what's next in my notes, you guys? Let's talk about the characters, because as we talk about the characters, I can tell you a little more about the plot. Well, I think you're probably catching on to a lot of the plot as we've gone through this so far already. I've enjoyed this very much. It was a very good little story. It was a good little fairy tale. I enjoyed. But I want to mention that we had basically 3 female characters. And I mentioned that there was that one queen from way, 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 way back who did have all those napkins made. Thus, she is important, right? She is important. I think that was Valera. I'm not sure. As you can see, her naming wasn't important enough for it to stick. All right. Notice that trend. We have Sasha the queen who dies. She is murdered in childbirth. We have a girl that Peter spends the night with. On the night that he is framed for murder, he is off with a gal. And his father, the king, has mentioned to him, "Oh, I hear that you're seeing someone. I hope that she is special." And Peter's like, "Yeah, she's pretty special. She's not special enough for us to know her name." I don't believe we ever heard her name in this book. I think she's a noble, but I don't know. Then we have a third lady in the book. Her name is Naomi. Naomi, thank goodness, Stephen King gave her something good to do. Let me tell you why she got something good to do. Because Stephen's daughter is named Naomi, and he wrote this book for his daughter, Naomi, which that's lovely. So in the 3rd act, we meet a gal named Naomi. Naomi is, she lives with or lives near this group of, I don't want to call them rebels, but they're like refugees. They are people who have left the kingdom of Delane. They have gotten away from Delane because it has just gone downhill since Thomas became king. And Flagg, the evil magician, is his advisor, his closest advisor, the evil whispering in his ear all the time. Tommy the taxer, he has raised taxes on the farmers and the merchants and everyone so much that they just they can't survive. They can't stay there. And many people have lost their homes, lost their farms, lost their businesses, and they've just moved away. Most of the nobles have moved out. They've gone elsewhere to try to survive elsewhere. And quite a few of them have met up in this not really a compound, but in a place in the forest to the north. And Naomi has, her father has a stable of dogs. He breeds dogs, and she has some dogs that take the sled back and forth between Delane and the refugee camp. So she takes she takes Ben Stade, one of Peter's friends, from that camp back to Delane. Is that all I want to talk about her? She has a dog named Frisky. Frisky is a smart dog. This dog can track anything. And we get to see some stuff from Frisky's point of view too, which is really, really cute, very clever. Yeah. Frisky and Naomi are a good pair. They're good companions together. They work together very well. So that was nice. There you go. So we were talking about the female characters. That was it. Those 3. Naomi, thank goodness Naomi had, good stuff to do in here. She had good agency. She was able to do stuff to help move the plot and help work things through in the 3rd act. She and Ben Stade worked together to get to Dennis and help him get out of the napkin room. And they gathered up a whole lot of these napkins for a good purpose. Again, those napkins, they were so important. Okay. Yeah. But I was not thrilled with the lack of female representation, but it was a story written by a guy about 2 princes, so there weren't going to be a lot of gals. I liked the fact that Naomi was a good character who came in the 3rd act and was able to be a part of saving the day. That was good. Now let's talk about Thomas. Oh, you guys, poor Thomas. This kid, he was doomed from the start. Okay. Let's start with page 47, where we talk about Thomas. Hold, please. All right, page 47. I wrote in the margin, psychopath. Thomas is the younger of the two brothers, so he's I think 5 years younger than Peter, right around in there. I don't want to say that he is weak. He is able to do certain tasks very well. When he gets older, he is able to, he does archery very well. That is his sport, archery. He does it well. His father does not recognize that. The king doesn't really recognize, hey, Thomas is good at archery. Roland is very good at calling out the great things that Peter is good at. He's very good at pointing out, hey, Peter did this thing really well today. Hey, Peter saved this thing today. Hey, Peter did this thing great today. Did y'all see Peter do this? And he doesn't point out, hey, Thomas did great at archery the other day. He doesn't do that. And so Thomas is always just kind of cast to the side, just almost ignored. All right. The few times that King Roland and his younger son are together, Thomas is thrilled by it. And he just doesn't get enough of those father-son moments. He just doesn't. And he feels left out. He feels neglected. He feels alone. And Flagg, this evil magician, this evil bad guy, preys upon that and needles Thomas about that and just uses every opportunity he can to make Thomas feel worse. Ugh, he's just a bad guy. But anyway, so on pages 46, 47, we see Thomas upset. He's angry about something that he overheard his father say. And this is the next day. He's still upset. The next day, while idling behind the outer kitchens, Thomas spied a half-crippled old dog foraging for garbage. He seized a rock and threw it. The stone flew to the mark. The dog yipped and fell down, badly hurt. Thomas knew his brother, although 5 years older, could not have made such a shot at half the distance. But that was a cold satisfaction, because he also knew that Pete never would have thrown a rock at a poor, hungry dog in the first place, especially one as old and decrepit as this one obviously was. For a moment, compassion filled Thomas's heart, and his eyes filled with tears. Then, for no reason at all, he thought of his father saying, "Looks like a little turd with a handkerchief sticking out of it." He gathered up a handful of rocks and went over to where the dog lay on its side, dazed and bleeding from one ear. Part of him wanted to let the dog alone, or perhaps heal it as Peter had healed Peony, to make his very own dog and to make it his very own dog and love it forever. But part of him wanted to hurt it, as if hurting the dog would ease some of his own hurt. He stood above it, undecided, and then a terrible thought came to him. Suppose that dog was Peter. That decided the case. Thomas stood over the old dog and threw stones at it until it was dead. No one saw him, but if someone had, he or she would have thought, there is a boy who is bad, and perhaps even evil. But the person who saw only the cruel murder of that dog would not have seen what happened the day before, would not have seen Thomas throwing up in a basin and crying bitterly as he did it. He was often a confused boy, often a sadly unlucky boy. But I stick to what I said. He was never a bad boy, not really. I also said that no one saw the stoning of the mongrel dog behind the outer kitchens. But that was not quite true. Flagg saw it that night in his magic crystal. He saw it, and it was well pleased by it. Okay, so this kid is a psychopath. Okay, the narrator is trying to make excuses for Thomas. The narrator tries to make excuses for Thomas throughout this book. Thomas is he's a bad kid. He's a screwed up little kid. And he grows up screwed up because Flagg is constantly needling him, constantly bugging him, constantly turning him to the dark side. Okay, he's being nurtured into bad. Okay, he's being nurtured into the bad side. He's where else do we have this happening? Page 210. Let's go to page 210. I mean, there's plenty of examples, but page 210 is where we see that Flagg has him hooked on drugs. Oh, and also, this is the second sleepwalking book in a row that I've read. I just did a review for Desolation of Dreams by Miguel Garcia. And in that one, we had a main character who had sleepwalking disorder. But in here, Thomas does sleepwalk. He has these weird dreams at night. He'll get up. He's being influenced by an evil magician. So he's got weird things going on in his head. But here we go. On page 210, Thomas had drunk far less than usual, but strangely had seemed drunker than ever to Dennis. At this point in the story, Thomas is older. He is the king now because Flagg has murdered the king. Peter has been framed for it and is up in the Needle in prison. Dennis is now butler to Thomas. Thomas had drunk far less than usual, but strangely had seemed drunker than ever to Dennis. His sentences had been broken and garbled, his eyes wide and staring, showing too much of the whites. This was, to a large extent, because Flagg was gone. Okay, so Flagg has gone up to the northern realms to weed out and look for this supposed renegade group of nobles, right? He's gone up there to look for these people that have fled Delane. He thinks that he needs to go and stomp that out. Thomas was always more skittish when Flagg was gone. He knew it was because he had come to depend completely on the dark magician, but he had come to depend on Flagg in ways he did not fully understand. Too much wine was no longer Thomas's only vice. Sleep is often denied to those with secrets, and Thomas was afflicted with severe insomnia. Without knowing it, he had become addicted to Flagg's sleeping potions. So out here in the margin, I wrote, getting him hooked on drugs and alcohol too. So Flagg has just done everything in his power to just reduce Thomas to an automaton. He's turned him into a puppet. Flagg is using Thomas as a puppet to rule this kingdom. All right. What else do we have? Okay, so other characters. We've talked about Peter as we've gone through the story so far. Peter he's a good kid. All right, he's a good guy. He loved his father. Even when King Roland was just, kind of gross, even when King Roland did things that, you would question, even when he was being drunk or whatever, Peter still loved his dad. Peter approached Thomas once and was like, hey, you know what would be really cool is if you and I, as his sons, took him a cup of wine every night. He likes to have his wine in the evening. You and I should take a cup of wine that we buy out of our allowance and go to dad and sit with him of the evening by the fire and drink a cup of wine with him. And Thomas was like, that sounds stupid. Because, Thomas is not a good kid. Thomas, that sounds stupid. Dad has all the money in the kingdom. He has all this money that he got from, the invading sailors that he beat all those years ago. He's got all this money in all these coffers. He doesn't need us to buy wine with his own money and take it to him. That is stupid, and I'm not going to participate. And he didn't. And Peter was like, okay, fine. You don't have to, but I'm going to do it. So Peter would take his own money and would buy bottles of wine. It would take a cup of wine to his father each evening. And King Roland really appreciated that. He saw that as the act that it was. It was an act of kindness. It was an act of love. And they would sit and talk for a little bit, and then one evening, after they had their cup of wine, Peter was leaving to go see his honey, his gal that we never got a name for, and Roland was like, be kind to her, be nice to her. Bye. And then Flagg came in afterward and poisoned the king and killed him. And Peter got blamed for it because Peter was the one who usually brought wine to the king. Here's the thing. Years beforehand, the king had killed a dragon. And here's where the dragon comes in. This is the only part of this story that has the dragon, you guys. The eyes of the dragon comes in here. Years ago, King Roland wasn't a drunkard. Years ago, King Roland had been out with his nobles and his men hunting, and a dragon crashed out of the forest, surprising them all. And Roland was the one who went, whoa, hey, there's a dragon, and pulled back his bow and shot the arrow that went into the dragon's throat, into the soft scales under his throat, and killed him before he could unleash his fire upon the men. So Roland killed the dragon, and they called this dragon Niner, and he mounted the dragon's head on the wall in his lounge, in his parlor outside of his bedroom. Okay, so the king's parlor has all of these mounted stuffed heads of different animals that he had killed over the years, and there's Niner. Behind Niner was a passageway. So if you go into this secret passageway, you could slide open these little doors and look through Niner's eyes into that parlor and spy on the king. Flagg knew about it, and he could spy on the king, and he showed it to Thomas. So Thomas, one night, was looking through the spy holes, and he saw Flagg come into the room and give the poisoned wine to the king. So Thomas knew of this treachery. He knew who murdered the king, and he said nothing. That's the kind of boy Thomas was. Right. Then we also have Dennis. Dennis is our butler, who I think was 20 when that poisoning happened. Dennis is the one who found the little mouse and the little grains of poison that Flagg planted in Peter's room so that Peter could be framed for this murder. Dennis found it, and he was just torn over what he should do. He didn't know what it meant. His father was the butler for the king at the time, was like, oh, we've got to turn this into the authorities. They will know what to do. And they turned it in to the authorities, and the authorities questioned Peter and decided, you're guilty, dude. Up to the needle you go. Ben Stade is one of our characters. Ben is a son of a noble person. Ben is Peter's best friend. They grew up together. Even though Ben is he's not a nobleman, but he is a friend to Peter. They've been friends forever. But when Peter is accused of having killed the king, Ben and his family are suddenly like persona non grata. Everyone is mad at them. They're like, oh, how much did you know? Were you in on it? And they beat him up all the time, because that's nothing like vigilante justice, right? Okay, so Ben is in a bad way once Peter goes into the needle, but Ben never gives up on his friend. He can't believe that Peter would have killed his father. He doesn't believe it because he knows his friend, and he knows that Peter loved his dad. Okay. Then there's Naomi. We talked about Naomi. She's a good gal, right? And she's a strong, good gal. She takes good care of her doggies, and she's part of the group of Ben and Dennis who help get a message to Peter. They help get all those napkins gathered up. They help Peter when he makes his great escape. Now we've got to talk about Flagg, the demon. You guys, there are folks out there, there are reviewers out there, there are editors out there, there are writers out there who will tell you that your bad guy always has to have a backstory, has to have a motivation, has to have a villain origin story. There has to be a reason for your bad guy to be bad, okay? If your bad guy is a demon, that's why he's bad. Let me just state that again. If your bad guy is a demon, that is why he's bad. Demons are bad. Do I need to say that again? Demons are bad. Demons are not good. Demons do bad things because they are bad. Demons sow chaos. Demons want to sow chaos. Flagg is a demon. He's been around for like 500 years. All right. He's not just some fly-by-night guy who has, was like, I don't know, abused when he was a kid and therefore has this backstory that makes him want to hurt other people. No, he's a demon. He wants to hurt, No, he's a demon. He wants to hurt other people because that is his modus operandi. He wants to sow chaos. He wants to bring down the kingdom of Delane because it pleases him to do so. That's it. I have a story right now I'm finishing up for release by Christmas time where there is a demon, and the demon's purpose is to sow chaos. He wants to do bad things because he's bad. That's it. That's the backstory. That's the origin story. Demon, bad. And that's Flagg in this book. Stephen King has given us that bad guy. If you read The Word and the Void from, you guys, Terry Brooks, there is a demon in the Word and the Void series, in that trilogy. And he is bad because he's a demon. He is Legion. He brings the bad to the story because he's bad. There's no origin story to the guy. He's a demon. Have I driven that point home yet? All right, let's go to page 49. Maybe. Here's 40. Here we go, page 49. And let's look at this. Oh yeah, in the margin I wrote evil is, because it is. Okay, and Stephen King writes, what did he want? Flagg, what did he want? That question I think I can answer. He wanted what evil men always want, to have power and to use that power to make mischief. Being a king did not interest him because the heads of kings all too often found their way to spikes on castle walls when things went wrong. But the advisors to kings, the spinners in the shadows, such people usually melted away like evening shadows at dawning as soon as the headsman's axe started to fall. Flagg was a sickness, a fever looking for a cool brow to heat up. Nice. This guy, he slinks around in the shadows. He has a room in like the cellar, the dungeon area of the castle. He has a two-headed parrot. He has like that spider that he feeds poisoned baby mice to. He has these creatures that he fattens up so that he can use their poison against others. Page 67, we are nurturing Thomas's psychopathy. I even wrote that in the margin, nurturing the psychopathy. Okay, do you think strange Flagg would know something about Thomas that Thomas didn't know about himself? It really isn't strange at all. People's minds, particularly children, are like wells, deep wells full of sweet water. And sometimes, when a particular thought is too unpleasant to bear, the person who has that thought will lock it into a heavy box and throw it into that well. He listens for the splash, and then the box is gone. Except it is not, of course, not really. Flagg, being very old and very wise, as well as very wicked, knew that even the deepest well has a bottom, and just because a thing is out of sight doesn't mean it is gone. It is still there, resting at the bottom. And he knew that the caskets those evil, frightening ideas are buried in may rot, and the nastiness inside may leak out after a while and poison the water. And when the well of the mind is badly poisoned, we call the result insanity. If the magician showed him scary things in the castle sometimes, he did it because he knew that the more frightened of him Thomas was, the more power he would gain over Thomas. And he knew he could have that power because he knew something I've already told you, that Thomas was weak and often neglected by his father. Flagg wanted Thomas to be afraid of him, and he wanted to make sure that, as the years passed, Thomas had to throw many of those locked boxes into the darkness inside him. If Thomas were to go insane at some point after he became king, well, what of that? It would make it easier for Flagg to rule, and it would make his power all the greater. How did Flagg know the right times to visit Thomas and take him on these strange tours of the castle? Sometimes he saw what had happened to make Thomas sad or angry in his crystal. More often, he simply felt an urge to go to Thomas and heeded it. That instinct for mischief rarely led him wrong. So Flagg shows Thomas where the secret passageway is, to look through the eyes of Niner to see the king, and to see the king kind of in a downward spiral. So Thomas gets to see his father when his father is not at his best, when his father thinks he's alone, when he's like picking his nose, when he's drunk and ranting at the mounted heads on the walls. He's seeing his father when he is not, when he's not at his best. And I don't want to say that he grew to hate his father. He didn't grow to hate him, but he did not love him. He certainly didn't love him the way that Peter did. Peter loved his dad. Peter would never have entertained the idea of murdering his father. Thomas, I have my doubts about. And so when King Roland was murdered, Thomas was, he was dismayed. He was beside himself with worry. When he was crowned, he was nervous. He did not want to be made king. He didn't want to do it. He did not want to be the king. He was sick, literally throwing up, because he did not want to go through with being king. He didn't want to be made king. He didn't want to be in front of those crowds with the crown on his head. When it happened, when he did get the crown on his head, suddenly he's like, oh my gosh, they're cheering for me. They're not cheering for Peter. They're cheering for me. And that went to his head, and he was excited about that. All of a sudden, he has some power. This poor kid, Flagg did a number on him, and it showed. So Thomas was a problematic character right up until the end. Here's where I'm going to spoil everything. If I haven't spoiled everything so far, I'm going to spoil everything and tell you Peter escaped the needle. His friends were true to him and assisted with those fabulous napkins. And they did run from Flagg, who was trying to capture them and kill Peter because he was mad that he was escaping. It's almost as if they led him back to King Roland's parlor, because above Niner's mounted head was the bow and arrow that had killed Niner. There was the arrow that King Roland had used, and that arrow is what Peter was going for. So he rushes in there that night, and it's missing because Thomas has gotten into the parlor too. And Thomas is sitting by the fire, quiet, in his dead father's robes, and he's holding the bow and arrow. And he's sitting there feeling sorry for himself and thinking deep thoughts, basically muddling over deep thoughts. He's got the bow and the arrow in his hands. It's not above Niner. So when Peter breaks in and he's got his three friends with him and Flagg is right behind him, there's all this mayhem and there's fighting and there's swords and this is the climax, right? And Thomas is the one who takes the bow and the arrow and shoots Flagg in the eye. And Flagg disappears, and we don't think he dies. We think he just went off to some other place because he's a demon. You can't really kill him. So off he goes. But Thomas is the one who exacts revenge. Thomas is the one who gets to avenge his father's death. Thomas is the one who saw the murder, and he's the one who gets to avenge the murder. And I thought that was interesting. That was that was cool. Thomas gets to do this great avenging deed. He gets to do this thing. I thought, wow, we gave that to Thomas. Good for him, and good for him for doing it. Okay? Good for him for having it in him to stand up, shoot the arrow, kill the bad guy, or at least attempt to kill the bad guy, and save the day. And then Thomas is like, okay, I'm going to pardon Peter because he didn't do this thing, and he does. So Peter is set free, and Peter gets to be the king because Thomas is like, I'm out of here. The people of this country are not going to forgive me for all the horrible things I've been doing over the last 5 years, right? So he leaves. He goes off on his little quest. Dennis goes with him to assist. Yeah. And they lived happily ever after. Sort of. There you go. That is, let me get you the cover. That is The Eyes. Oh, you guys, I'll get it. That is The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King, a fantastic YA fantasy story, which I enjoyed greatly. Thumbs up for a great dragon story in our dragon reading challenge for this year. I think that's all, you guys. Thank you so much for sitting through all of this. Seriously, I hope that you guys got some of the messages out of this that I got out of this. I was so pleased with I was so pleased with the way, Sasha introduced the napkin to her son so that he was, asking for napkins as he was growing up, so that when he wanted the napkins, when he was in the needle, it wasn't that far-fetched. Then the napkins, this parallel idea of the napkins having been created by one of the former queens, to help the kingdom when all the people in the kingdom just needed a job. So now we just have to take the logos off of them. So now we just, give them to Peter and he can use them. He was using them. Just wonderfully done. And it says on the back flap, Stephen King shares that, let's see. I sat down one night in our Western Maine house to start this story, then called The Napkins. Oh, I can see why he originally called it The Napkins. I see that. And that it makes absolute sense. That would not have sold as well, I'm sure, as The Eyes of the Dragon. I mean, that's a great title, The Eyes of the Dragon. Okay, you guys, thumbs up for The Eyes of the Dragon. Thank you so much for tuning in.